It's hard to believe I built this router table almost 5 years ago when I was barely starting out in woodworking. That seems crazy to me. Back then, I was barely a year into my woodworking journey, but somehow managed to come up with the design for this build from scratch and managed to pull it off with the limited experience that I had. But you know what? It turned out awesome and it's still in great shape today. Now, I did make a few mistakes back then, nothing major, but there are a few things that I would have done differently and that I have upgraded since then. So today I'm revisiting this router table build in full, starting with the tabletop and fence, onto the cabinet, and finishing up with dust collection. And big announcement, people have been asking for the plans for years, and I'm excited to say that they're finally here. My most epic plans yet are now available on my website, and you'll find a link down in the description below. Alright, so let's rewind a few years and dive right in. The tabletop will be melamine doubled up with plywood. The melamine will provide a low friction surface, while the added thickness of the plywood will give me the support I need for the router lift and ensure the tabletop stays dead flat. The router lift I've been using is the Rockler Pro Lift. Full disclosure, they provided it for free back then. It's a great router lift, all metal with both a quick adjust and a micro adjust crank feature for raising and lowering the bit. I love how the ring just pops up with the press of a button, but I wish it didn't have these engravings so the surface was smoother. Also, if you want various size insert rings, you have to purchase them separately. Now, you don't have to use a router lift, you could just use a router insert plate, but then you'd have to be reaching down underneath the table to adjust the height, and that just defeats the purpose of having a router table if you ask me. Other brands you might want to consider for router lifts might be Jessam, Craig, Incra, just to name a few. I'll position the router lift upside down and center it. Then trace the contour. The insert plate needs to be countersunk so it'll sit on a lip, so I traced out a smaller box inside the first one. I made sure to leave some room in the corners where the insert plate will be screwed to the table. In hindsight, I should have dog-eared all 4 corners because I'll need them for the leveling feet. You'll see what I mean in just a bit. The first step is to cut out the inner shape using a jigsaw. I'll first drill some relief holes to allow me to insert the blade, but it didn't take me long to realize that my holes were a bit too small, so I made some bigger ones and finished making the cutout. To countersink the router lift, I used a flush trim bit with a top bearing that'll ride along a fence. I used some double-sided tape to secure these makeshift fences that'll guide the bearing, and position them right up against the outer lines I had traced. I set the bit to the right depth, then went around in a clockwise direction. Then finished off by cleaning out the 2 corners. Before removing the fence guides, I dropped in the router lift upside down and removed just one guide to check that I got the depth right. The idea is to get it to sit just below the surface. I'll be adding some leveling feet later on that'll allow me to dial in the height just right. Next, I'm adding T-track to the front side of the table. Now, some commercial tables have a miter slot here, but I've never used a miter gauge with my table. Personally, I chose to go with a T-track so I could use feather boards and such, but you could always make a wider slot to accommodate a miter T-track combo channel here. I'm marking it out so the track will be about 1.5 inches in front of the insert plate. Next, you'll see me using an overly complicated method to create a dado to countersink the track. I'm using the same 1/2 inch router bit with a top bearing as I used before, which makes creating a 3/4 inch groove a bit more challenging. My recommendation here would be to use a 3/4 inch mortising bit instead. That way you only need to clamp down one guide, and there's no risk of getting the width of the dado wrong. The other obvious observation that can be made here is that the trim router I'm using is way underpowered for this job. Because I was putting so much pressure on the router to move it forward, I ended up moving one of the fences and making a boo-boo. Oh well, I did a test fit with the track, making sure it sat flush beneath the surface. Next, I marked out the tracks on the backside that'll hold down the fence. I cut 2 short pieces of aluminum T-track for this. I think this was the first time I ever cut aluminum with a miter saw, and I was so nervous, but it turns out it cuts quite smoothly. I used the same guide system as before to create a 3/4 inch wide channel for my router bit, but this time I added a piece of tape to let me know where to stop. Again, using a 3/4 inch bit here would have been easier and given a more professional result on these stop dados. To secure the tracks, I use Weld-Bond glue. I had never heard of it before, but it promised to stick to both particle board and metal. And after 5 years, it hasn't failed me yet. So I'd use it again for this, or alternatively, you could also try 5-minute epoxy. And I won't lie, I was pretty proud of myself for thinking of using dowels to help clamp down the tracks while they dried. Alright, it's time to double up the table with some plywood. I lined up both pieces and transferred over the cutout onto the plywood. By this point I had realized that I needed to keep the 4 corners for the future leveling feet. So I dog-eared those corners and then cut out the shape using a jigsaw. I flipped over the tabletop and laid the plywood on top, aligning both holes. I then clamped them together and screwed down the plywood to the melamine. I should have mentioned that my plywood piece was cut just a little oversized so I could then use my router to flush them up. Next, I'll add the leveling feet in the 4 corners. You'll see me using furniture glides here with plastic inserts. This was probably the biggest mistake I made with this build. The plastic inserts ended up sliding out under the weight of the router lift, and therefore the insert plate kept sinking below the surface. You can see here how the plastic inserts are falling out, and it doesn't take much just to yank them out completely. Luckily, this was a really easy fix. I simply replaced the plastic inserts with some metal threaded inserts, securing them with a dab of crazy glue. I also replaced the feet with some longer screws. As you can see, it's super easy to just reach under the table and adjust the screws until the insert plate is perfectly flush. To finish off the table, I decided to add some hardwood trim around the sides to protect the fragile edges and simply to give the table a more polished look. I marked off where the tracks hit the edges of the table and cut a dado into the trim to make sure I could still slide in my T-bolts once the trim was in place. I didn't want any visible nails, so I used only glue and mostly painter's tape to hold the trim in place with the help of a few clamps. Okay, moving on to the fence now. For the fence, you'll need 2 strips of plywood and 1 strip of melamine. Just as I did for the table, I'm inserting a T-track into the fence so I can use feather boards or other accessories. Just like before, I clamped down one fence and then used the track as a spacer to clamp down the second fence. This time around, I used my more powerful router, which made the job much easier, and I didn't get any tear out like with my trim router. After a dry fit and checking that the track was below the surface, I again used some Weld-Bond glue to secure the track and clamped it to dry. I'm going to use a similar lamination system as the table to ensure the fence stays dead flat. The assembly should look something like this, and then we'll just add a dust port on the back. I need to make an opening in the fence to allow the dust to pass through both the upright fence and the piece that's flat against the table. For this, I simply used a hole saw, and then finished off the cut with my table saw. All the exact measurements are included in the plans if you want to check those out. I'm assembling the fence with glue and brad nails. My main goal here is to make the front of the fence perfectly flat and square. For that reason, I added these little triangles and checked for square as I went. I secured the dust port using Weld-Bond glue. But I ended up replacing this port, and on the second install I used both glue and screws for more strength and a better seal. This dust port did not fit with a standard hose, so I ended up ordering another one which was a perfect fit. As you can see here, the original port did not fit with the hose. In fact, it fit over the new one that I got, which confirms the design flaw. The bighorn port, on the other hand, that I got was a perfect fit. I carried over the hole to the melamine face, again using a hole saw. Then, being a little more cautious, I finished the cut with a hacksaw. Not sure I got a cleaner cut than with a table saw, but a little sanding helped make the opening nice and smooth to prevent any potential snagging. Now I just need to attach the melamine face to the plywood structure. I want to make sure the fence is flat, so I decided to use my table saw's fence to ensure this fence stayed flat and square during this final step. I added some screws from the back, careful not to hit the T-track with any screws. After a quick check with the level, it looks like it worked perfectly. Alright, the last step is to mount the fence onto the table. After marking the location, I drilled the holes slightly larger than the bolts I'm using so the fence will have a little wiggle room. So these are actually toilet floor bolts. Now don't worry, they're brand new. I used the washers that came with them and paired them up with some star knobs. Alternatively, you can purchase these as a set. I'll leave a link down below. Some people have commented about the absence of trim around the fence like I did to the table. I get it. It would definitely make it look more polished, so if you feel so inclined, by all means add some trim. Also, I've been asked about a split fence, and while I thought of making one, I just haven't used any large bits on my router table yet. So this fence has been all I need. If you do want to use bigger, wider bits, you'll want to consider upgrading to a split fence. Okay, let's move on to part 2, the cabinet. For me, the tricky part of working with plywood is actually getting it from the store to my garage. I can't fit a full sheet in my SUV, and that's why in the plans I've included some key cuts that you can have made at the store to make transportation easier. You'll need a sheet and a half of 3/4 inch plywood and a full sheet of 1/2 inch plywood. And all of the dimensions and cutting diagrams are clearly detailed in the plans. Before I assemble the cabinet, I'll take a moment to first cut out the opening for the dust port on the back panel. This router table is designed with dual dust ports, one on the fence and one on the cabinet. And you really need both for efficient dust collection, but more on dust collection towards the end of the video. After tracing the outer shape and creating an offset for the inner shape, and tracing that out too, I used my jigsaw to cut out the inner shape. Alright, moving on to assembly, I used pocket screws to connect pretty much every part of this cabinet. After 5 years of wheeling it around, it's still holding up just like new. And I didn't even use any glue, but don't tell anyone. But you should probably use some glue. I drilled all the pocket holes as per the plans using my old K4 pocket hole jig. I used some clamps so the parts wouldn't move around on me as I drove in the pocket screws. A lot of people have asked me about this compact driver I'm using. I love this thing, but unfortunately it was discontinued years ago. So after installing the middle shelf, I slid the bottom panel underneath and secured it with some more pocket screws. Unfortunately, back then I didn't record the sound for any of my builds for some reason, so I can't even let you just enjoy the sound effects. Sorry. Next, I'll be making 2 large drawers for the bottom section. To size the drawers, you'll want to measure the opening, then subtract 1 inch, which is the thickness of 2 drawer slides. I'm using 1/2 inch plywood for the drawer boxes that I'll assemble using pocket screws. The bottom drawer is pretty deep, and you'll notice I only made 2 pocket holes. I haven't had any issues, but it's recommended to make at least 3 pocket holes here. To assemble the drawer, I applied some glue, then drove a few brad nails just to maintain the alignment while I drove in the pocket screws. I applied a generous bead of glue all along the edges, then dropped on the bottom panel and secured it using several brad nails. And yes, 5 years later, these drawers are holding strong, good as new. With the 2 drawer boxes assembled, it's time to install them. I used these soft close side mount drawer slides, and here's how I learned to install them. First, use a small spacer and place the slide on top. Then you want to flush it up with the front of the cabinet, but set it back by 1/8 of an inch. Hold it firmly, then extend the slide to expose the screw holes and drive in the provided screws. There should be about 3 or 4 holes depending on the drawer slide. Next, with the bottom spacer still in place, drop in the drawer box and extend the slide, then flush it up with the front of the box. Drive in the first screw, then slide it out a little more to find the next screw hole. I'm not sure I realized this at the time because I don't have any footage of me actually doing this, but you're supposed to remove the drawer to install the back screws. Just extend the drawer and use the plastic tabs to release it. Then once the screws are in, reinstall the drawer. You might have to force it a little at first for it to actually go in, but it should re-engage and then slide like new again. For the top drawer, I recommend getting some drawer slide jigs, or you could just use a strip of wood. I started by marking the height of the slides on both sides, then clamp the jig right up against that reference line. Now I can simply sit the drawer slide right up on that jig and secure it just as I did before. You can then flip around the jigs and use them to hold up the drawer while you secure it. I think this was my first time installing drawers, and somehow it all worked out perfectly. Alright, next I'll add the drawer fronts. Again, starting with the bottom drawer so I can use the workbench as a physical reference. I'll then check that both sides are flush with the edges of the cabinet. Next you want to squeeze tight, then gently pull out the drawer just enough so you can get some clamps on. You can then extend the drawer further and drive in some screws from inside after first drilling some pilot holes using a countersink bit. The top drawer is always what seems to get people scratching their heads, but it's essentially the same as the bottom drawer. The only difference is you want to pull out both drawers just a bit so you can use the bottom drawer as a physical reference. Just add some small spacers like some washers and line up the edges. Then just as before, clamp on the drawer front so you can pull it out further and then drive in the screws from the inside. Before this thing gets too heavy, I decided to install the caster wheels. I get all my caster wheels from Princess Auto. They have a great selection of heavy-duty locking caster wheels like these ones. I like to install them with lag screws. It just seems more robust than regular screws, and the head is beefy so it won't slip through the holes or require the use of a washer. At this point, I realized that I had to get this thing down to the ground, which is easier said than done. I'll let you enjoy watching me awkwardly wrestle this thing and try to stop it from falling. It didn't help that I was using a rickety old workbench at the time that was really just some plastic sawhorses with a beat up sheet of plywood on top. Of course, the workbench started to move away from me, but somehow I eventually got this thing down to the floor without any major mess ups. Now that it's upright, I can install the dust port on the back. This is a 4-inch dust port that will connect to my main dust collector, and I'll show you more about that towards the end. The top part of the cabinet will have 3 small drawers on each side with a door in the center to access the router. I got a little creative with the drawer design, trying to keep it as simple as possible. In fact, they're technically not even drawers, more like pull-out trays. But some of them ended up being drawers in the end. You'll see what I mean. For now, I just installed a bunch of strips which will act as guides for 3 drawer trays. I mirrored the same install onto a second panel that I'll secure to the cabinet using pocket screws. And there we have it, 3 drawer trays. I repeated the exact same thing on the other side of the cabinet for a total of 6 drawer trays. Okay, now I need a way to pull these trays out, so I figured I would install these false fronts just so I could have something to secure the drawer fronts to. So pocket screw, repeat 6 times, and voila. Now I can install the pretty drawer fronts similarly to what I did for the bottom drawers. Start with washers to get the spacing just right, then align the drawer front and clamp it on. I can then pull it out and secure it from inside with 2 screws. And once the bottom was done, I could just work my way all the way up until I had them all installed. You probably noticed that the door is already installed, so let me show you how I did that. First, I marked the location of the hinge and screw holes using this very cheap basic jig. Today I'd use my Craig jig that takes the guesswork out of it and controls the depth of the bit, but back then this is what I had and it worked out just as well. I was just careful not to drill too deep. basically followed the instructions on the package to roughly mark out where these cabinet wings go, then loosely secured them. Once the door is clipped on, you can tighten down the wings, then adjust the hinges using the set screws until the door is level. So with that, we have our cabinet, but I'm not quite done yet. I still need to add the hardware, a power switch, and customize these drawers. I use this cabinet hardware jig to help me consistently position each of the knobs. It also helps to guide the bit so you're drilling straight. For the bigger bottom drawers, I went with pulls instead and used the same jig to drill the holes. I wasn't crazy about the brushed nickel look, so I eventually painted them all red. So back to these pull-out trays now. If you want to convert them into drawers, it's really simple. Just cut 4 pieces out of more 1/2-inch ply to create a box. Then just nail it together and nail it to the tray from underneath. I decided to dedicate one drawer to bit storage. I grabbed a 2x6 and drilled evenly spaced holes all over it. I then simply nailed it to the tray from underneath. You can do whatever you want with these really. Some of them I just use as is, and that works just fine for storage too. Before I install the switch, I need to install the router, which means it's finally time to install the top that I made in the first part of the video. After centering it on the cabinet, I secured it using pocket screws in all the pre-drilled pocket holes. I reused the switch I had on my old router table, but you can buy these aftermarket. I want it on the hinge side so the wires won't be in the way when I open the door. Speaking of wires, I'll need to make a hole through the door to hook up the switch to my router. I attempted to drill the hole using this very aggressive speed paddle, which was a mistake. I've since learned that if you want a clean hole, use a Forstner bit. I could then mount the switch and feed the wires through. And last but not least, I mounted my router to the router lift and dropped it into place. And with that, we have ourselves a premium router table. If you've been watching this whole time, thanks for tagging along. Otherwise, to recap the dust collection setup, here we go. I have a 4-inch port on the back of the cabinet that connects to a 4-inch hose and into a Y fitting. Then more 4-inch hose that feeds into the dust collector. On the back of the fence, there's a 2.5-inch port that leads into a 2.5-inch hose and into the Y fitting, bringing it all back to the dust collector. By the way, this mounting bracket that you see, it didn't hold up. It was also in the way when I wanted to store the cabinet up against the wall, so I ended up removing it altogether. Now I just connect the holes when I want to use the router, then remove it when I'm done and store it on top. This is truly the recommended setup if you want effective dust collection on a router table. If you try to only use one of the 2 ports, you'll collect some dust, but not all. And if you don't have a dust collector and only plan to connect a shop vac to the fence port, that'll only get you so far. You see, a shop vac just won't have the CFM required to suck out all that flying dust. But hey, it's better than nothing if that's all you got. In the original Part 3 dust collection video, I went through the whole troubleshooting process and figured out how to optimize airflow for the dust collection to work efficiently. The thing is, this cabinet is sealed so tightly that even the most powerful dust collector won't be able to suck out any dust if it's not getting fresh air to fill the void. My first clue was seeing how hard it was to open the door with the dust collector running. After only a few cuts, I could already see all the dust pooling in the cabinet. I then did a test with the door ajar, and suddenly no more dust. I knew I was onto something. I needed to create more airflow by creating an opening for air intake. Although I knew an intake on the front, opposite from the dust port, would likely be ideal, I didn't want to deface the cabinet. So instead I grabbed a drill and a Forstner bit and started drilling holes at the back towards the top. I ran a few tests and the results were amazing. I could feel the airflow and I couldn't see any more dust pooling in the cabinet. And it's been working well ever since. So that's a wrap on this router table build revisit. Again, I have plans available for this build that include nearly 30 pages of detailed instructions, all the dimensions, cut lists, 3D diagrams, and more. And you'll find that link down below. Thanks for watching. Until next time, see you soon.